Now, I know what a lot of you are going to say. You really don't care about Episode 9 theories because you either have no plans on watching it, or maybe you are going to see it, but you don't care about theories because what can this movie really do with the story at this point? You see everything from the name of the film, The Rise of Skywalker, to bringing back Palpatine as cheap gimmicks or an attempted cash grab. And if that's your view or position right now, I can certainly understand that, and I don't blame you for it. Of all aspects of Disney Star Wars, the sequel trilogy has been probably the most disappointing, at least in my opinion. But it's also because a lot of fans feel that way right now that I think there's a chance, a small glimmer of hope, that Episode 9 will do something bold to get people talking or buzzing about this movie once it actually comes out. And no, I don't mean bold like turning Luke into a green milk drinking hermit who's given up on the Jedi. I mean bold with one of their new characters that many feel have been bland and boring thus far, especially compared to those older ones. I mean, if you hear, for example, something like Rey turns to the dark side in this movie and ultimately doesn't survive, that just might get you to buy a ticket when you otherwise may not have. Because, let's be real here, for a lot of people, one of the biggest issues with the sequel trilogy is they don't like Rey because she's near perfect and can't fail, or so they feel. And it's not very exciting to watch a character who has impenetrable plot armor, who you know without a shadow of a doubt is going to win in the end, but it is exciting to watch a character like that fail and fall. And I know what a lot of you will say in response, that Disney will never let anything bad happen to their new Star Wars princess. And sadly, you probably are right. There's every chance, as I've speculated in other videos, that they'll play it very safe with this story and not dive too deeply into the lore, and give us a movie that might end up being pretty good, but with little chance of actually being truly great or memorable, which you can certainly argue the end of this epic 9-part saga should be. And so to be honest with you here, I think the best we can hope for is something somewhere in between these two, something between the very shocking extreme and the overly safe and boring. Something short of Rey going full Daenerys from Game of Thrones and committing some ultimate evil act, but something more than her just being a nobody who thwarts Kylo Ren and Palpatine just because she's Rey the Great. And sure, you could still do something with their parents to make her interesting, or more interesting than she currently is. You could still make her the daughter of Luke, I guess, or the long-lost child of Han and Leia. But I really feel like the ship has sailed on both those possibilities, and that they should go a different route if they do decide to change her parents. A more surprising one, and something that might actually really shock some people. Something like Rey ending up being a Palpatine, which is a theory I've liked since the very beginning, and then in this film she can be truly tempted by the dark side and maybe even briefly fall to it, which may open the door for some sort of Ben Solo redemption when he gives his life to save her and to bring her back to the light, which is a kind of flip of the script of how Luke brought Anakin back. Now, is something like that alone exciting enough to get some fans back on board and interested in Rey and willing to forgive what they see as perceived mistakes with this trilogy? Well, that's hard to say until we see how they would actually execute it in the film. But I do think there's potential here, and that it could fit into the story they've already been telling with just a few minor tweaks. Because, for one, it's been heavily implied since the beginning of the new canon that Palpatine had some sort of plan for coming back from the dead, as was dealt with extensively in the Aftermath trilogy. Hell, even if you want to just look at the movies, we have the Opera House scene in Revenge of the Sith, where he talks about cheating death and how his old master, Plagueis, had achieved it, or at least had learned how to save others from dying. Not to mention, Plagueis had also learned to create life, and promptly taught Palpatine everything he knew before he was killed. So if we do all the math here, maybe Palpatine was creating vessels for himself that he'd use to come back from the dead if he ever died at some point. Anakin could have been one of his first attempts to make such a vessel. And recently, it was heavily implied in a new canon comic book that Palpatine did indeed create Anakin. So perhaps Rey, or Rey's mother or father, since Rey was born roughly 10 years after Palpatine's death, could be another vessel created by Palpatine, and if she is the offspring of such a vessel, it makes sense that she was just as strong as Kylo Ren, since they'd both be descendants of beings Palpatine had created using the Force. They'd both be pretty much the same thing. This might also explain the bond between Rey and Kylo Ren, which we've been told by J.J. Abrams will further get explained in this movie. Not to mention the one that seems to be between Rey and Leia, since they hugged each other out of the blue towards the end of The Force Awakens, seemingly being able to sense each other or each other's pain. This then means that Kylo and Rey are not connected because of a link put in place by Snoke, but because of what they are and how closely related to the Force they are. The bond could be something Snoke discovered and was just exploiting and took credit for, or maybe he made it stronger so that they could actually interact across great distances, a more powerful or enhanced version of Luke and Leia being able to commune or sense each other across distances. Not to mention, Snoke himself could even be another vessel, one Palpatine attempted to enter at some point after his death, but something went horribly wrong which left Snoke twisted and deformed, and Palpatine still on the other side looking to come back, if you will. We were even told at one point by Pablo Hidalgo of the Lucasfilm Story Group, I believe, that Snoke was once a handsome individual. So maybe what an awakening is actually an attempt by Palpatine to come back and join with one of these vessels. And he tried to do that with Rey, which Kylo and Snoke both sensed because, well, they're vessels too. But again, something went wrong and it only gave her powers, but once again left Palpatine on the outside looking in. Or maybe it didn't go wrong at all and Palpatine is very slowly taking over. And this takeover is so subtle that even Snoke didn't realize it when Rey was in his presence and when he looked into her mind. And yeah, that's a long shot, but maybe the story of Episode 9 will be Rey ridding herself of Palpatine. Furthermore here, the connection between Rey and Kylo Ren could be the reason why Rey felt so compelled to go to him and to try to save him in The Last Jedi. And no, I'm not saying I think that's what Rian Johnson's reasoning was for Rey throwing caution to the wind when she went to Kylo, but it could be construed that way if you adjusted the story. Then there's the fact that Rey is from Jakku, a planet that Palpatine had a great deal of interest in, and one where some of his followers actually attempted to resurrect him in Aftermath. So I guess it's possible some of those followers remained and were raising a grandchild of his or an offspring of a vessel, but at some point either they had to leave or just couldn't or didn't want to do it anymore, and they abandoned her. This, of course, then means that Kylo Ren lied to Rey about her parents in The Last Jedi, and maybe for good reason, because he knew what she was but didn't want her to know the truth. And if we go back to The Force Awakens, especially the novelization, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Kylo Ren knew who Rey was from the very start, or strongly suspected who she was. That line in the movie where Kylo says, "What girl?" always sticks out to me. It seems to suggest he was afraid of coming across some girl at some point, and maybe one he suspected of being on Jakku, which is where he was at the time. And that's why he so quickly jumped to the conclusion that he did when an officer told him about a girl who had helped them escape. He also seemed surprised when he finally encounters Rey that she's just a scavenger, which further suggests he knows who or what she is, and is surprised that she hasn't become something more. The novelization takes this all a step further, and Kylo says, "It is you," when, towards the end of the film, Rey pulls Anakin's saber to her over him. Problem is, none of this gets played upon in The Last Jedi, which means that, to get back to the other storyline, we will have to have it where Kylo was just lying to Rey about her parents, because he had a good reason to keep it from her. And look, I know the real reason why it's all inconsistent in regards to all this, and that's because, for better or worse, Rian Johnson didn't give a damn what the novelization of The Force Awakens said. Hell, since he wrote the script for The Last Jedi while The Force Awakens was still filming, there's every chance the novelization was being written at the same time or hadn't even started yet. So again, he probably doesn't know or care what it even says in there. Which is a shame. It's a shame when random fans on the internet put more thought and care into fun or stupid theories than those making the films put into the real thing. And so one of my hopes right now is that J.J. Abrams is looking at all of these little threads, that he did his homework actually, and is trying to take a movie that might be able to make sense out of all of this. Even though, as I've talked about elsewhere, the best and safest bet at this point might be to try and just make a movie mostly free or independent of the incoherent mess created by the previous two movies. But hey, if Kylo Ren knows that Rey is a grandchild or creation of Palpatine's, and that's the reason he wanted her to join him, so that he, a descendant of Darth Vader, could now rule the galaxy with a Palpatine at his side, if that's the thing that Vader started that Kylo now wants to finish, a Skywalker and Palpatine ruling the galaxy once more, I can get on board with that at this point. It just has to be careful about tampering too much with the legacy of Anakin Skywalker. Because, as I talked about in one of my more recent videos, it's sad that he seems to be completely forgotten in all of this. It's sad that he's not a part of his own story anymore. And really, Anakin must be a part of this final chapter in some respect. If not, I don't care what they do, I'm probably not going to like it. They have to put right the whole Skywalker family somehow, which is what I think they will try to do, hence the name The Rise of Skywalker. And I think that name will apply to all Skywalkers, that all of them will rise in some capacity, including Kylo Ren, who I think will earn a level of redemption in this movie, but will die in the process. In closing here, again, I realize I'm construing things a certain way to quote-unquote fix this trilogy when a lot of you think it should just crash and burn, and that it's too late to go back and alter the perception of things to make it all fit or work. And I know many more of you will say that the Skywalker saga ended with Return of the Jedi, and that's that. And in many ways, I absolutely agree with you. George Lucas's version of Star Wars ended with Return of the Jedi, and foolishly you could say, especially now in hindsight, Lucasfilm under Disney and without George tried to directly carry on that story, and they tried to do it without any sort of solid game plan in place beforehand, and many will say they utterly failed, including me. And pretty much no matter what they do at this point with Episode 9, it's not going to live up to those previous two trilogies under George, and this new ending won't match the one Return of the Jedi gave us. But there's a part of me that's just okay with that, because in my head and in my heart, I've completely separated the two at this point. Disney Star Wars is a different thing when compared to George Lucas's Star Wars. Just like with Legends, or what used to be called the Expanded Universe, it's another type of what-if universe, one where George's Star Wars gets expanded on by those who simply are not him. And if you want to consider Disney canon your official canon, you can. And technically, it is, unfortunately. If you want the EU, though, to be your official canon, go ahead. Or if the only official canon for you is the work of George Lucas himself, then so be it. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about Rey being a Palpatine. Is that a good or bad idea, or do you not care at this point? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thank you for watching.